Welcome to another episode of the Cypher Report, where we give you the tools, information, and analysis you need to decrypt the world. Today's episode is a cordial debate I had with Quibbles Over Coffee on the Israel-Palestine Conflict. In this debate, we dive deep into the history of Israel, we make comparisons between what happened in Israel with other nations, moral agency, and if the decisions made were the best possible moral option. The debate is lightly edited to remove dead air, internet troubles, and a few corrections and additions that we needed to make for clarity. If you would like to join us for a friendly debate, please email us at info@cypherreport.com and be sure to hit that bell to stay up to date with our latest offerings. Let's go ahead and get into it now. So Quibbles, you and I had a disagreement online about a few things when it comes to the Israeli response in Gaza, but my audience doesn't know this stuff because nobody that I talk to actually does Twitter or whatever. So in your perspective, what was like the central disagreement that brought us together today to have this conversation?
Yeah, so I think that hopefully we can agree at the baseline, and I think we do agree on this part, that the status quo is untenable, that yes. What was going on before October 7th is the reason that October 7th happened. And if we want to make sure that another October 7th doesn't happen again, whatever the resolution is of the current conflict in its most immediate sense, needs to get to a different place than we were on October 6th. So that's sort of the baseline that I come from. From that, when I sort of unpack the financials of it, and we can certainly get into that, and if we look at like the sort of situation as a whole, I don't see a way of permitting Hamas to continue to be in control of the Gaza Strip and also seeing Israel continue to be a country. And I certainly don't see a trajectory of the people, the Palestinian people, even in the West Bank, let alone in the Gaza Strip, getting towards a trajectory of actual sort of freedom and independence from Israel proper until Hamas is out of power. So therefore, my baseline is that we need to get Hamas out of power. From that baseline that Hamas needs to be out of power, I think that the best and most obvious answer is, unfortunately, and I really don't like this answer, so if you have a better answer, I want to hear it and expand it in depth. But the best answer that I can come up with is, unfortunately, that I think that the best way is to get an Area C style control. So that's to say both military and civil control by the IDF over the totality of the Gaza Strip for a very short period of time, which I understand why you give that face, and it is a valid face to give. And that's the starting point. But once you've done that, I want an immediate trajectory from that point forward towards elections, not just in the Gaza Strip, but also in Area C of the West Bank as it exists currently. Realistically, when those happen, those elections will almost certainly, even if on paper Hamas is kept off of the ballots, the people who were elected are going to be at least tacitly endorsed by Hamas, which is unfortunate, but just a reality of the political context in both of those places. Once that happens, you can have an Area B style control, which is to say civil control by, in this case, Hamas most realistically in Gaza and what is presently Area C. But then you can also have Area B as it exists currently within the West Bank continue to be under the Fatah sort of control. And I think that very quickly, once you see those things, there'll be a very obvious differential being made between what it looks like to be a Palestinian living under Fatah, which is obviously imperfect and obviously difficult, but it's better than living under Hamas. And I think that one-to-one parallel is going to be really useful, particularly in the case of the West Bank, in making it clear that Fatah is the better choice, and that eventually we'll get to a point where Fatah has genuine democratic support of its people. And when that happens, I think it's going to be much more possible, although very difficult still, outside of Jerusalem to see the rest of the West Bank gain independence. And in the case of Jerusalem itself, I think Jerusalem itself is going to continue to be incredibly difficult. And in the case of Gaza, I think this is the best way of just keeping things safe, so fewer people are dying on a monthly and weekly and daily basis. But I don't see it as a trajectory towards peace itself in terms of like an actual piece of sort of justice, if that makes sense. But I think it's the closest to a good step in the right direction all around that I can think of.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. So, I am not intimately familiar with the difference between Area C, Area B levels of control. It is my understanding that prior to the uprooting of the IDF from the Gaza Strip, they were under much harsher lockdowns than the West Bank was. It was essentially military control, and that has been a thing in Israel since roughly 72. Year is probably a little off there, but 70, early 70s, late 70s time frame. And then it wasn't until, what was it, 2005, 2006?
2005.
Yeah. So 2005.
I'm actually, continue.
Yeah, so
I can double check that.
It was either 2005 or 2006 is when the then Prime Minister of Israel decided to leave without consulting Fatah or the PLO or anybody else for that matter to leave Gaza under Israeli terms, which essentially uprooted the entire Jewish settlements that were in there, and it was considered a grand tragedy for the Jewish people from the likes of Bibi Netanyahu and those to his right. A thing that would never again happen under his watch, kind of thing. So just to give some primer to this to the audience, as far as like what how Fatah is running kind of the West Bank, I don't think your solution is really a solution, even in the short term, specifically because the Palestinians don't have really autonomy under the current status quo. That is even before October 7th. So, October 6th to the past, because of what the Israeli government itself has been doing in order to maintain control over those areas. We can talk about settlements. We can talk about the different cards that the members of or Palestinians have. There's it's a blue card, a green card. Might be getting the colors wrong here. But there's different levels of access that Palestinians have, different levels of security the Palestinians have to go through in order to have basic living. And essentially, they are under a military blockade, for lack of a better way to phrase it. And if that is what you're expecting to happen in Gaza after they've had relatively more autonomy than the West Bank has had over the last 10 years or so, after Bibi came back to power and facilitated money transfers from Qatar and other Arab nations into the West Bank to build it up, or not the West Bank, I'm sorry, into the Gaza Strip to build it up, while undermining Abbas and the PLO. I don't think the Palestinians will actually accept that, and I don't blame them. So I think there has to be something else done rather than more military control over those areas.
So I just laid out sort of basically what I think is the least bad option, and I want to be very clear. I'm saying least bad, not good, because it's not a good option at all. I'm curious what you think. What do you think should be done?
Well, first and foremost, I think the right wing of Israel needs to lose power. I think that they've shown that they are ineffective at maintaining not only Israeli security, but also Palestinian security, and have done everything that they could in their power to undermine a two-state solution, because ultimately, at the end of the day, they want a single state where it's Greater Israel or just Israel. I don't, we can quibble over that, so to speak. But they definitely want all of current Israel, which includes to them the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, to be under the administrative and government control of Israelis and the Jewish people. On top of that, Bibi Netanyahu and others in the right wing have talked about maintaining a certain level of Arab citizenship at a manageable level in order to maintain a Jewish state. So if in their one state solution, which is what they're pushing for, that still is the oppression and subjugation of the Palestinian people, even under a nominally liberal form of democratic government, because they don't want to see the Arab population or the Palestinian population, we can talk about the difference between the two, grow to a point to where it is no longer a Jewish majority state. So as far as what I think could be tenable, I don't really see a good option either. And realistically, I don't think there's one's going to happen. If I was able to wave a magic wand and make things fixed, it would include different Arab states giving up part of their territories in very small territories. So Egypt, Lebanon, and not Jordan. Jordan's on the east side of Israel, right? It's not on the west. Mm-hmm. So it's Syria that's on the west.
West Bank was part of, East Bank is Jordan proper. West Bank is,
So, so Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt giving up a very small sliver of their territory that allows the Palestinians.
Egypt, Lebanon. I'm just taking notes. You said Egypt, Lebanon, and what was the last one?
Syria.
And Syria.
Very small parts of their states. Very small. I'm talking, where basically the border area that already has a massive amount of Palestinian people living there already. That doesn't have to include the Golan Heights, since Israel is very much anti that for security reasons, which from a strategic standpoint makes sense. From a moral one, I can't really say one way or the other on that one. In order for them to have access to the sea, as well as being able to have enough access to that sea for ports and freshwater distillation, so that they can have a viable state. Basically, you don't cut Israel down the middle because it's too small, but you give enough territory around that area so they have a continuous state. So you don't have these enclave pockets that exist. So you're
saying in Syria, not Golan Heights, but more inland of Syria, past the Golan Heights.
No, my geography is probably not great. My understanding of the Golan Heights is that the reason that Israel does not want that to be controlled by anybody but themselves is for security reasons, because it's a high ground. If that is where that border is.
Partly that. It's also partly because there is a very long history of the Druze, Druze, not Jewish people, but Druze, which is an Arab minority. Sure. They've been massively subjugated, particularly by the Assad regime. And that has been something that at this point, the Druze, which is the majority of people who live in the Golan Heights, including even Jewish people, I believe, but certainly the majority of Arab people living in the Golan Heights, they are definitely at risk of being murdered and ethnically cleansed. There have been recent pogroms against them, and that is likely to continue if they are not there. So that's
from ISIS and other. Understandable. So if it's not just a purely security thing, then maybe there's some leeway that can be done there to create. But I don't think that the two-state solution that everybody talks about, where they have a discontinuous border from the West Bank to Gaza, is actually a tenable state either. That it's just ripe for encirclement and not having guaranteed security given for Israel's own security needs, which are valid needs, given the history of the last 60 years.
So it's untenable for West Bank and Gaza to be separate countries, is what you're saying?
I would say that if we want to have a continuous Palestinian state that guarantees the security needs of both the Palestinians and the Israelis, having two ethnic enclaves that are discontinuous puts both groups at risk. So ideally, they would be a continuous border. There would be continuous land that makes up the Palestinian state and a continuous one that makes up the Jewish one.
Okay, but that's not how the geography works, right? There's a massive pocket in the West Bank. There's a massive pocket.
It would require a massive displacement of a bunch of people. I understand this. I said this is my magic wand solution because it would guarantee as a magic wand.
So given the geography as it exists, obviously you're not calling. I assume you're not calling for the ethnic cleansing of the people, presumably in Gaza, to force them over to the West Bank. Right.
No. It would be like a mass movement of people. Like, when during Oslo they were saying this is like where we're starting from, and then there would be like land swaps so that they could get a more tenable geography.
Yeah, I hear. Layout. I mean, like this is
they would be like
this
that.
That's as a idea that reminds me of India-Pakistan, but obviously the India-Pakistan situation, I would think fairly can be called an ethnic cleansing to some degree, right? Even if parts of it were done.
Technically yes, but without the malice involved. Like if there's no malice involved, there's no like if there's compensation, if there's just a mass movement of people to create these ethnically mostly homogenous states for both people to have security guarantees, access to the sea, all that stuff, then I wouldn't consider that to be ethnic cleansing because of the negative connotation that is associated with that.
Okay,
when Pakistan broke away from India, there was fights that broke out. There was all that stuff. There was a mass movement of people that were forced to move due to ethnic tensions. Magic Wand Cipher would be like, let's not have any of that happen. Let's get everybody on the same page so that it's an agreement. Not likely to happen at all. This is like Magic Wand. What's more likely to happen is probably, to be honest, other ethnic cleansing, which is what I believe we're seeing right now within Gaza, and a single Jewish dominated state. I think that's the most likely scenario, given the power that be's right now. In a non-idealized world where there's both a Palestinian state and a Jewish state that exist within some borders, maybe a federated system could kind of work. But I don't see either side agreeing to that. Not either side that has power at this point. So that was a lot.
So yeah, you're totally fine. It's a complicated subject. It's valid to give a lot. Okay. So this magic wand, I wanted to start with a magic wand, and then we'll get to the more realistic one. In the magic wand sort of mass movement of people, you would presumably want a very large portion of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip to move to the West Bank.
I personally don't care where they're situated. What it matters is not to have two ethnic enclaves that exist that create a untenable security situation for both groups, because you essentially have in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, you're surrounded on all sides by Jewish population, by Israel. West Bank not so, Gaza Strip not so much, because
Gaza is touching Egypt, the West Bank is touching Jordan. Right.
So not on all sides, but so you have 3 points of contact on both, but also because that gives the right wing in Israel a forever need of, we have to maintain security. We have to have a stand. They're going to have a standing army, but a standing army that actually is pointed at those two ethnic enclaves, as well as demands for checkpoints and all that stuff. So you have two discontinuous groups that have a state that are discontinuous. So if they try to travel from one to the other, they're not getting the full autonomy rights, because they'll have to go through checkpoints to get to each of them in order to on the Israeli side.
Okay, so if the whole of the Jewish population and the whole of the Palestinian population were on opposite sides of a border, of a single border, you're saying that would make it, that would solve this issue.
It wouldn't solve it, but it would make it more tenable, and it would help with the security concerns of both groups. Because one of the reasons why both of what the West and Israel considers to be good deals for a Palestinian state failed is two reasons, but we'll only talk about one of them right now. Was the security issues. They didn't want the West Bank or Gaza Strip to have a standing army. And you really don't have a country if you can't have your own security, and if their security umbrella is being provided entirely by another group of people that you don't trust. That's not really a state. We can talk about how Japan was. We can talk about Japan and Germany post World War II, but now they have their own full countries with the armies. They help other people out. They have full autonomy. So.
Wait. So okay, if you don't have an army, you aren't a country.
You're not. If you're not allowed to have an army because of security concerns of your neighbors, and they do what they can to make sure you don't have an army, you're not really a fully independent country.
Aren't there close to 20 different countries
there's a bunch of different countries that don't have armies, but they're not being forced to not have armies by other nations, as far as I know.
Isn't that true of Andorra, and isn't that true of Costa Rica? And of the Dominican
Republic? Are they being forced to not have armies by other countries?
In the case of Andorra, yeah. Are they relying on Spain and France? Isn't that explicitly part of their treaty? Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of different countries that don't. I can list them, but there are a bunch of different countries, and admittedly, there are small countries, but there are a lot of countries that rely on other countries for their
You can be reliant on another country, but to me, if you're being forced by another country to not have your own standing army, then you don't really have autonomy and nationhood as a country. So when Japan was occupied by the United States and forced to do everything the United States wanted, Japan wasn't its own country. It was not a vassal, because there wasn't that level of control, but it was essentially like occupied by the United States until they left. Mm-hmm. Well, left. Like, do you understand my concern here?
I do understand your concern. I also think that it was the right decision. I mean, we made a lot of mistakes, obviously.
I'm not saying what we did with Japan was right or wrong. I'm saying until that was gone, they weren't a fully independent country that was able to shape its own destiny.
Had we had we left Japan and not done that and just allowed them to have a military the moment that we left, do you think that our relationship with Japan would be as good as it is today?
Oh, probably not. No.
Okay, so I mean, the question of like
a temporary occupation or security concerns can be valid. The concern is that the trust between the two groups basically is non-existent. And so the reason that it was rejected is because they never thought that Israel would actually leave.
But that's true of Japan too. Japan didn't trust us when
right, but I mean, yeah, sure.
And also Germany.
Sure. Yeah.
So what's different about the German or Japanese situation versus the Palestinian?
I would say that they're probably not going to agree with this, but the war primarily.
What do you mean the war?
World War II. Like they're the aggressors.
What's different about that?
They're the aggressors.
Okay, so because Japan and Germany are the aggressors, that makes it appropriate.
It can make it more appropriate. And I'm not going to say one way or the other if it's appropriate or not. I likely was, but I wasn't there. Say again?
Who was the aggressor on October 7th?
Well, obviously Hamas.
Okay, so then why is it different in that case than it is
because of the occupation that's been going on since 1970 whatever? Or we can go further back if you want to.
Yeah, we should go further back, right? Because the issue is that the issue that I come to is that like the reason for like the whole of this started the day that Israel declared independence. It was immediately invaded by every single one of its neighbors.
Neighbors, right? But that's not the Palestinian people on the whole.
Well, okay. I don't think that the German people were all Nazis, right?
No, but Germany. Okay. Do you think that once the Arab nations lost the war, that the Palestinian people themselves should have been subjugated in the way that they were?
So the should have been is sort of begging the question. Do I think that they ethically deserved it? Of course they didn't. I also don't think that the German people ethically deserved what happened post-World War II.
Okay.
But I think that what happened post-World War II is the least bad option.
Okay. So do you think that the Palestinians as a people, as the group, not even a people, well, let's just say the Palestinians that lived in Palestine at the time that Israel unilaterally declared independence and started to set up a Jewish state within the borders that made up Palestine/Israel of the time, were the proper or were morally culpable for the rest of the Arab nations for attacking Israel?
Was Israel responsible for getting attacked?
Are the Palestinians morally responsible for Israel getting attacked? Okay.
No, and neither were the Germans responsible for World War II.
I would say the German people electing Hitler makes them partly responsible.
But my point is, like, in the same way that, like, it is true that at one point the people of the West Bank and also of Gaza have supported terrorist organizations and have elected terrorist organizations, and certainly in the case of Gaza, right?
Sure.
But it is also true that they literally haven't had an election for over a decade.
Correct.
And it is also true that in the case of the Nazi Germany, I don't think that I'm comfortable suggesting that under a fascist dictatorship or under a terrorist dictatorship, that the people who are living under that dictatorship are guilty of the crimes of their dictators, right?
Sure.
So like do I hold the average German culpable?
So I guess my question is, do you think that what Israel does to the Palestinians is, we can't say equivalent, but as close as you can give it to equivalent to what America did to Germany and Japan?
I think that in both cases, it's the least bad option.
That's not the question, though.
Okay, go for it.
I'm just saying. Do you think that do you think they're equivalent enough to say that they're? Do you think that they come as close to equivalent as possible?
I think that in both cases, mistakes are and have been made.
Okay.
And I think that in both cases, that in aggregate, the fact that Germany was occupied or the fact that the West Bank was occupied were in both cases the correct decision to be made under a very bad list of options.
Okay. And so in those occupations, is Israel justified in, well, okay, you said mistakes were made, so probably not, but in the way that Israel has done its occupation in both the West Bank and Gaza Strip, do you think that there is any sort of, like I said, for lack of a better term, justification for taking property and the other stuff that is causing some of this issue?
Taking property, no. Purchasing property as a government, no. Purchasing property as individuals, yes.
Wait. I'm confused about that. So I understand. So taking property, definitely no. Purchasing property as individuals. So you mean an Israeli buying property from a Palestinian? That's morally not good to you? Just making sure. Okay. So I did understand correctly. I'm okay with that. Oh, it is okay. But the government doing it is not good.
If the person is purchasing it, I think it's okay. If the government is purchasing it, I'm not okay with that. Correct.
Okay. Do you think that there's any sort of coercion that's done when it's the individuals doing it between each other?
That's why I'm not comfortable with it being the government. If it's the government, there's a definitional coercion involved. If it's not the government, if it's individuals, I don't think there's an inherent coercion.
So if we're talking post 1960, because I don't want to talk about 1800s because that's fucking whole other mess. Post 1960, right? So you're saying that two individuals that buy property, an Israeli buying property from a Palestinian, even with the occupation and coercion and lack of rights that Palestinians have, that's fine? You don't find any coercion there?
In the purchasing of property? No. There are other things that people are involved in that are obviously horrible, right? But I don't think the purchase of property itself, of course. But I don't think that the purchase of property itself is a crime. No.
I didn't say it's crime. I said there's some coercion being involved.
Moral crime. Moral crime. Obviously, according to the UN, it is a crime. Illegal, as in it's illegal. But in terms of the moral question of whether or not someone who is Jewish and up until very recently was living in a place like Egypt, or very recently living in a place like Jordan itself, which also ethnically cleansed their Jews. I'm not comfortable with the idea that those Jews who want to live in Judea, and the birthplace of Judaism, closest to the most holy sites, with the exception of one, which are literally every single other holy site other than Al-Aqsa, other than the Wailing Wall, all of them are in the West Bank. So, I'm not comfortable saying that those Jews are morally condemnable for doing that.
I don't think they're morally condemnable as individuals necessarily. There might be some issues that we don't know about, so that's why I said necessarily. It could be bribery or something going on. I don't fucking know. But I do think that there is inherent coercion due to how they're being treated by the Israeli government, and for that matter, I mean, in the case of some instances, even the PLO.
So what's the coercion in that situation?
The desperation that is inherent within being an occupied people.
Okay, so because the people of the West Bank are desperate, yes, you're not able to make financial.
No, they can.
You can't make those.
You can, but you have to understand that is still a aspect of coercion being done, because absent that occupation, you can't know for certain if they would be willing to enter these contracts, because the occupation is more than likely spurring some of that on.
Do you think that
it's the same
people who are impoverished should be able to sell their property?
You froze again.
Do you think that people who are impoverished, I apologize, my internet's being sucky. Do you think that people who are impoverished should be able to sell their property?
They should be able to sell their property, yes. But people that are impoverished aren't under an occupation.
But the reasons that you're concerned about their ability to genuinely consent to the exchange are the same reasons, right? What other reasons other than the financial desperation?
It's not financial. It's not financial. Like the occupation itself creates another layer. It's a similar instance of, like, say we can take this to the United States, Black Wall Street, firebombed, right? Whatever. Any black person that sold property to white people to get the fuck out afterwards were under duress. They were under coercion because of that action. So they didn't have full autonomy to make that. They had autonomy to make that decision, but the coercion that was involved in that makes it a little icky, at the very least. I'm not saying the individuals that are doing that aren't capable of making their decisions. The Palestinian that's selling their property, get the fuck out, is likely making the best decision that they can in order to, improve their condition. So I'm not saying that person is bad. I'm not even saying the Jewish person that's buying the property is bad. I'm saying there is an element of coercion here that makes it icky. It's a similar thing to where, like, maybe you and I can think, organ donating or organ selling is something that should be allowed. I don't know if you do or not. I personally don't. But
probably do.
But if a person is extremely destitute and that is the only way that they can get out, that is icky. And that's the thing.
I agree. So, you're bringing up Black Wall Street. I think it's a good example. I think also Kristallnacht is an obvious example as well.
What was? I just didn't understand.
Kristallnacht.
Crystal what? Kristallnacht?
Kristallnacht.
Okay.
Yeah. So Kristallnacht was the day of the broken glass. In English, it was the day that a bunch of Jewish businesses were destroyed.
Gotcha.
Prior to the Holocaust itself happening.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And after it, a very large number of Jews, for pennies on the dollar, sold all of their belongings and sold all of their businesses across Germany and Poland. Actually, I'm not even sure if it was in Poland as well. I should have said the Poland component there.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that this is a good example in the case of Black Wall Street as well. The difference there that I see is that there is an immediate and reasonable belief that if you don't sell, that you are going to lose the property anyway, right?
You don't think that's happening within the West Bank with all of with any place where there's settlements?
No. In the case of settlements, no. In the case of outposts, yes, for sure.
Oh, but that's why. So you're making a distinction there. I don't make a distinction there, but I understand. Yeah. For who watches this later, make that distinction though.
Like, for sure. So an outpost is something where at least a component of the land has been stolen and has been occupied without paying the Palestinian people who had owned it prior. And those are illegal, not just according to the UN, but also according to Israel as well. Right. Israel has destroyed some of them. Unfortunately, Israel under Bibi Netanyahu has not destroyed all of them. I wish that Israel would destroy all of them in the case of the outposts. Now, outposts are different than the case of settlements proper. Settlements proper are purchased rightly. I'm saying rightly, again, I mean morally, not legally according to the UN, but legally according to Israel proper. And according to Israel, they have been purchased rightly by Jewish settlers and who want to live in those places. And so I think that is a important distinction. And when I think about the reason that I'm opposed to the Kristallnacht sales or the sales of Black Wall Street, it is because of the very explicit and obvious evidence that if you don't sell right now, you are going to lose your property in the very near future.
Sure. And the reason I don't make the distinction between the two is because from the Palestinian perspective, they don't know when it's going to stop. And all things indicate that it's not going to stop at all from their perspective. Why would it? They've had increasingly shrinking the occupations, the occupation, the outpost, all of it. They don't have any indication that it stops.
Okay, so the occupation and the outposts and the settlements are different things, right? So the occupation just means military control by the IDF. Sure. So that's separate than Jews moving in. And I want to be careful here. Go for it.
I'm just saying from the Palestinian perspective, though, they're all connected. We have to acknowledge that.
Yes, for sure. Okay. These things are connected. But the point is that...
So let's go on. So the occupation happens, right? They're under the direct control of the Israeli government. Then the Israeli government takes land, right? The Israeli government doesn't punish people.
Wait, I'm sorry. The Israeli government takes land?
Okay. The land is taken.
No, the land is purchased by Jews.
We're talking about all of the things. So
no, but my point is, you're saying the Israeli government is taking land. I want to be specific about this. That's not true. Right? That is not accurate of what's happening in the West Bank currently. What's happening in the West Bank currently?
I'm talking about all of it.
Okay, so you're talking.
So the occupation happened since the founding of Israel. The occupation happens.
Okay.
Israel takes land. The government does. The outposts are established. The Israeli government doesn't punish every single outpost. In fact, under right-wing governments, they seem to encourage some of it. And then settlements happen. You have this long, continuous line, and no indication of it's ever going to stop. So to a Palestinian, it is reasonable for them to believe that they need to sell now while they can still get some sort of money out of it before it just gets taken from them.
The first thing that's worth flagging is that all of the settlements that we're talking about are literally less than 1% of the land. So I don't think that it's fair to suggest that the average Palestinian who's living in the West Bank can reasonably be under the assumption that the settlements are going to represent a large percentage of the land as a whole. That's number one. That said, they certainly are defensible in their belief that for a very long period of time, that area A will continue to be area A, but also that area C will continue to be area C. And so if you have land in area C, they're reasonable to be concerned that for the foreseeable future, it will continue to be under both the military and civil control of the IDF. And I can understand why those people would be very uncomfortable living under the control of the IDF. But that doesn't mean that they're being forced into the sale of the land. It means
I didn't say forced. I said they're under duress. There's a difference.
Yeah, I don't think that's a valid separation. But I don't think that even that that it's fair to say they're under duress in the sale. I think that it's reasonable to suggest that more broadly they are being oppressed by the situation that they're in, and I think that is correct, that they are being oppressed in the situation. And I would similarly say that the people under Japanese or in the case of Germany, post-World War II were also under duress. But again, I wouldn't say that they were in a situation where they were like forced to sell their land as a result, right?
I still have my opinion, but I understand yours better. So I don't find it to be too objectionable.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay.
I would say that another distinction here is timeline. I would probably say if the Japanese people were under occupation in a similar way that the Palestinians are for the same amount of time, so we're talking almost 60 years now, or longer, depending on how you want to slice that timeline, that they would have every reason to have the same similar opinions and thoughts and everything that the current Palestinians do.
If the situation in Germany had lasted as long as the situation in West Bank,
I think we can make this not a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Are the troubles coming back between Ireland and the UK, Britain right now? Is there continue to be tensions?
They seem broadly to be okay. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm saying like there's issues bubbling up again due to some of the stuff, but prior to the ending of the troubles in 91.
Exactly, but yeah, somehow.
Yeah, there was massive issues, terrorism, occupation, and tanks rolling down the street, ethnic murders and stuff like that. I think that's more analogous to what is happening between Israel and the Palestinians right now, and honestly, that's probably why there's a lot of understanding between the two groups. At least you can see online, anyways.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. I think that there are a couple of distinctions that are worth pointing out in terms of the uh, those two different situations. The most obvious one is that Britain is an invader and always has been an invader of Ireland, and that is like that's the history, and it's not all that complicated.
Yeah.
It is a lot more complicated, and the history is a lot longer, and frankly, more bloody in the case of the
depending
Jewish,
on where you want to draw situation. The line out,
yeah. Like I guess that's true.
Well,
but
I don't think what happened.
Yeah.
So to me, I don't think what happened 2,000 years ago, while it's important, should have much impact on what's going on today. I don't buy the whole I don't buy the religious Zionist argument whatsoever, and I understand more the secular Zionist argument, but I reject it I reject the need for a to go back to the land that they're originally from in order to get that safety. We'll put it that way. At least in modern times. So it made more sense in the 1800s.
So if we could unpack that. So religious Zionism, how are you defining that, and why are you opposed to it?
God gave us this land. Like anything that's, philosophical religious justifications for the Zionist project, which, to be fair, back in the 1800s was a minority position. And Christian Zionism, I would include that too. Fuck those people.
Okay, so religious is God gave us the land, and your response is fuck that. We don't need to care.
Yeah, that's not a justification to me. I can understand it. It's not one that should entertain it as much as you need to in order to be respectful, but you don't have to accept it whatsoever.
Okay, and then secular Zionism, how are you defining that?
The idea that, it's just grew up around the nationalist movements of the 1800s. So basically, a land for a people for a land. Everybody has a right to self-determination. Our historic home is our, not necessarily our birthright, but it's a place that we come from. We have direct ties to it. Yada 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 yada. And in order to have full autonomy and security and that sort of stuff, that we need an ethnically homogenous, or mostly ethnically homogenous nation and to call our own.
Okay, so nationalism.
That's a very condensed version of this. I know a lot more. I just don't.
Okay. To have autonomy, you said to have autonomy and safety.
Autonomy, safety, self-determination. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's valid in terms of the safety there?
It made more sense in the 1800s. It makes less sense today. The argument that when it originally came into existence, the argument made a lot of sense, and in fact was probably justified. Today, I don't necessarily know if that is the case. I lean to it not being as justified.
Okay, so if we just went down the list of all of the surrounding countries of Israel, and I were to show you the number of Jews who lived there in 1900 and the number of Jews who live there today, every single one of those countries.
But that's a consequence of establishing Israel kind of in the first place. Not saying that it's morally justified. I'm saying it was the consequence. So the expelling of Jewish people from the Muslim Arab nations was a result of the establishment of Israel and the loss of the 1948 war. And I don't know the exact time frame there. I don't know if the Nakba happened first or afterwards, but it all happened around the same time. It is not morally right. What those nations did is extremely messed up. They should be forced to pay reparations. Like that's my opinion of this. Like none of that was good. None of it was good.
Okay, so let's unpack this. So you said the fact that that post-Holocaust Jews were expelled from the Muslim Arab nations is because of the creation of Israel?
I would say that is their justification for it, at least, yes. Not that it's right.
What would have happened to European Jews if not for the creation of Israel?
What would have happened to the European Jews?
Yeah.
After World War II, not a lot, I would hope. I mean, given Americans' occupation.
Okay, but realistically, saw pogroms happen across Russia following World War II. We saw smaller pogroms in Germany and Poland. The vast majority of Jews who lived in those places left, right? And they left.
Yeah, I would leave. I would leave too if Nazi Germany. I'm not. Go ahead.
My point is like the fact that Israel existed is the reason that those European Jews are alive. And then you're saying the fact that those European Jews are alive and therefore in Israel is the reason for what happened to the Jews across the rest of the Middle East. So my question is what would the alternative have been?
Well, right? The alternative could have been, a completely the alternative could have been, moving to other places in Europe. But I'm not going to, tell people that were fleeing Nazi Germany and that sort of stuff to move to Europe. Let's see, what's a good way to say this? The alternative to how Israel was established would have been probably the British Mandate for Palestine, where three countries, or was it two? I know there's dispute over what Jordan's supposed to represent with a lot of people, but yeah.
Okay, so the better option would have been British Mandate for Palestine would have continued. So you're saying...
Well, I'm not saying the British Mandate... When I say... So just to be clear, when I say British Mandate for Palestine, an establishment of the Palestinian state and the Jewish state without the shuffling.
Happened, right?
If you think Jordan is that, then sure, I don't necessarily agree with that.
The British Mandate for Palestine represented all of what is modern day Jordan and all of what is modern day Israel, with the exception of Golan Heights. So if we're talking about British Mandate of Palestine, we no longer count Jordanians as being Palestinians, but if we're talking about it in that context of post-British Mandate, it is true that the overwhelming majority of the land did end up in the hands of the non-Jews, but rather of the Muslims, right?
The Sultan was a whatever, right? The king of Jordan.
I forget his name. Yeah.
The king of Jordan. I am not sure if the Palestinian perspective of that is what you just laid out. That is why I'm not. Well, sure. That's why I said there is an issue with Jordan, and why I say, hey, probably.
Yeah, Palestinian is a new concept, and I don't mean that as as a pejorative. But
I know.
Palestinian, in the same way that Native American is a term that only makes sense in relationship to the non-Native Americans.
Right.
Prior to that, you were of a specific tribe. It is only now that there's an understanding of someone being.
And Palestinian nationalism doesn't. Palestinian nationalism is created in 1957 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly right. And so similarly, at the time, what we're really talking about is Muslims and Jews, right? And we're talking about.
But I'm not even sure if the Muslims in the area. I'm not sure it's the Muslim and Arabs in the area at the time that Israel was established and Jordan was established would have agreed that Jordan met the needs of what they were being argued for.
No, of course not. They wouldn't at all. Of course not. But my point is that if you're talking about just the literal amount of space that was provided.
Yeah, I don't care about the space though. That's the thing. If we're talking about the needs of a people to have an established state in order to have, safety and everything like that. And then you're talking about another group that has got a budding nationalist organization that's happening at the same time. Both people being given that state, not that state, but a state from that land, regardless of how it's chopped up, would have been the better thing.
That's my point. That's what happened. The overwhelming majority of the land did end up in the hands of Jordan.
It ended up in the hands of Jordan under the control of whoever was the king of that area at the time, and then divvied out of whatever his patronage system was. But the people that were the nascent Palestinian nationalists that existed at the same time, there was growing as well as where the Jewish people were in there, probably did not agree that was meeting what they expected it from the British Mandate for Palestine. That's my point.
Yeah, I agree with this, but the equivalent to what you're saying would be if I were to point out the history of India-Pakistan, and I were to say, here's this massive country that is India, and here's this much smaller country that is Pakistan. But inside of Pakistan, there's a number of people who would much rather and feel much more comfortable under a country that is not Muslim controlled, right?
Sure. I mean, isn't that what Bangladesh?
So the point is that like
Kashmir is.
But my point is that
I think that's Kashmir. Hold on. Go ahead. I got to look this up though.
That may be true. That may be true. But the broader point though is that like when you're talking about that, it's not quite fair to describe it as though the non-Muslim numbers of people didn't have a state within India, Pakistan as a whole. You're just describing a people within that category that were screwed over by it. And also similarly, there are of course many number of people who are Muslims living in India who were also fucked over. Yeah. And of course there were a number of people who were Jews living in Jordan who were also fucked over.
Which is why Hindu nationalism was tamped down by
absolutely.
By every prime minister up until like 1990 in India. So
for sure. And so the follow up to it is like, why is it that we're so ready to fight for the idea of a I'm going to avoid the term Palestinian here, and instead I'm going to use the term Muslim country within Israel, and we're not comfortable with the idea of a Jewish state within Jordan.
Oh, I don't care. There's
this massive movement, right? And it doesn't.
Because the reason being is that a lot of people consider Israel to be colonized or occupiers of a native people, and that the Israel.
But they're wrong.
Yeah, sure, but we aren't those people, so I don't want to speak for them. So. That's what I'll say about that.
But the point is that those people are wrong, and they should just be condemned for what they are, which is both incorrect and probably in many cases.
A lot of them are anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic, yeah. And to be clear, like, some of them are just dumb, right? There are dumb people out there, but like,
I mean, there is an argument to be made that there is settler colonial. Not program, that's a bad word. Settler colonial project. There we go. A settler colonial project that has existed in the land of Israel, that is Israel now, since the establishment of Zionism. Whether or not that is done in a moral way is a separate debate.
I think that settler colonial implies that, like, I'm even a little uncomfortable with the idea that we all call them settlements in the West Bank, because even that sort of implies.
I took it all the way back to 1850. Just now.
Yeah, I understand, but the idea of like a settler colonial state, like it evokes something, and I think intentionally evokes something paralleling the United States or South Africa and all of those. And I think those are very fundamentally unfair. Yeah, it's very intentional, and I think it's a little bit unfair because it's implying something of. It's implying a parallel there, which would imply that like the Jews aren't of that land, and that the Jews, like, I think of it more as I've called it a refugee state of return a lot in public, which I think is a much more apt way of thinking about it, because I mean, like, these are a bunch of people who had no other options of where to go for the most part. Not every single one. Some of them are from Brooklyn, but like the vast majority of them didn't really have other options, certainly in terms of the founding. And they are returning. They're going back to the land that they are fundamentally of.
I mean, but you have to, for that to be accepted, you have to accept the nationalist framing. People, a people is inherently tied to a land. Kind of thing, and a lot of people on the left don't. A lot of libertarians don't. If you're going to take the libertarian, and I mean that either left or right, but just libertarian in general, vantage point on this sort of perspective, I think that's potentially fair, but it would imply that you'd also have to condemn with the same level of ferocity the barring of Jews from living in places like Jordan, in places like Egypt, and therefore also in places like Gaza and the West Bank. The few that I know that are true libertarians that I've spoken to on a regular basis, all over the internet, actually have that position, and they condemn the United States just as much for similar reasons. So they're pretty consistent.
Sure. Yeah, but I think that the frustration that I have is that many people use those sort of optics against Israel in ways that are not consistent, right? Because they're using it against Israel, but in practice, they're actually using it against Jews, because if they were being consistent, they would also use it as a way of defending the rights of Jews. And I'm being careful here to say Jews, not Israelis, because even if they have Israeli citizenship, they're doing it for Jewish reasons, not for governmental reasons, who want to live inland of the West Bank and also in Gaza. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you, because we both agree that there's a lot of anti-Semitism out there. So.
Sure. Okay. So your secular nationalist movement, in terms of what Zionism is, you believe that there weren't really better options for the Jews who were escaping the Holocaust than to move to Israel proper, right?
There might have been, but in their shoes, probably not. So that's why I'm not willing to say to me, again, magic wand, we could set up a state in Texas. Like, I know that that's not viable or anything like that, but I'm saying, like, there's other options that weren't realistic that could have been tried, but weren't, because everybody hated Jews.
Russia, I forget what it was called, but Russia actually did make a place out in the tundra. That was
it was a tundra. Fuck that. Come on. Yeah. That wasn't real. That wasn't a real thing. That was like, we're going to expel our Jews to a place we don't give a shit about and let them just have it over there. Like, yeah.
So from a secular Jewish perspective, or not even secular, I'm sorry, secular Zionist rather, perspective, you're okay with a bunch of Holocaust survivors and Jews from across Europe, including not just the places that they were actually directly Holocausted, but also presumably places like England and France and all.
Sure.
Not France, England specifically, rather.
Right.
And Russia. You're okay with them moving to Israel?
I think moving to Israel is not the issue. I think what is the issue starts to arise. I mean, it arises before the establishment of Israel, but the issue arises with the hard right faction that made up the Zionist, because that's where you had paramilitary groups going around and like killing people, and that's both sides.
One piece by piece, right? So, so you're okay. The first step of a bunch of Jews from Europe post-Holocaust moving to what is now modern Israel, that's something you're okay with.
Yeah,
now let's talk about the paramilitary component. As you know, what happened in Jordan was a dictatorship, arose to power, right? Sure. So the alternative to what happened in Israel, which, should be clear, very complicated, very imperfect, but broadly a democracy, essentially. Democracy is better, I assume you'd grant, than dictatorship, right?
Yeah.
So if there's a war between those who want to see a democracy happen and those who want to see a dictatorship happen, and particularly if that war is happening in direct aftermath of the Holocaust, and those who are fighting in those wars are fully aware of the rampant anti-Semitism that they themselves have gone through, are they illogical in trying to defend their democracy? And
the paramilitary groups started before the establishment. It started during the British Mandate for Palestine. Actually, before that, it started in 1890 or something, and then after World War I, when British was the British were in control.
A lot post World War II, right?
So if you're talking about just post World War II, after the murders and the bombings and everything else that happened, where both two nationalist groups were trying to kill each other to create their own state. Sure, it's going to make sense that the paramilitary groups are coalesced into an actual fucking army to ward off the Arabs.
I'm not asking if it makes sense. I'm asking whether or not it was ethical.
Well, yeah, it's ethical to repel anybody invading you, but but we can't start post World War II.
But that's when the majority of the immigration was happening.
That's when the majority of the immigration was happening. But you can't discount all of the stuff that I brought up with Arabs killing each other, Arabs killing Jews over lies, Jewish people killing Arabs over lies. You can't discount all that. That is all. I don't want to take it all the way back, because it's a lot of shit to talk about. But if we're going to say hey, let's just talk about 1948 and say, does it make sense for that group to exist? Then you have to bring up this other stuff, because the other stuff is why that group existed.
I'm a Jew.
The paramilitary.
I just escaped
Go ahead.
the Holocaust.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm a Jew. I just escaped the Holocaust. I lost half of my family, obviously.
Right.
And I'm now going to this place that, number one, I literally prayed about and was, speaking to in secret and in hushed voices throughout the Holocaust and all of that. But like beyond that, that's admittedly the religious component, which we'll take as a separate component. But in terms of the secular component, I just escaped the Holocaust. Obviously, I am fleeing for my life. Obviously, I have reason to be concerned about staying in Germany or Poland or wherever I'm from. And now I'm in this place, and I know, I can see that there are lots of people who want to keep this from becoming a Jewish state. And there are other people who want this to become a Jewish state. And I can see that every single country surrounding me is not a democracy. And I want mine to be a democracy. And I want it to be a Jewish democracy, because I've seen what it looks like when Jews don't have that kind of security. And that's why I joined this military group. Am I wrong to be joining that military group? Like, no. Forgetting why the military group exists back in the 1800s, but like, am I wrong to join it?
No.
Okay. So those Jews were correct to do it. And the response,
a lot of the problems that I have with Israel are what happened partly before, but mostly after the founding.
Okay. So the founding itself was valid.
The founding itself can be valid. And I am willing to say that it's valid, but that doesn't justify any of the stuff that happened post or before the founding. And the stuff that happened post and before the founding is abhorrent shit. And that abhorrent shit is why a lot of people consider it to be a settler colonialist project.
A lot of horrible things have happened. I certainly agree with that. I want to unpack just like the timeline of events, right? So the timeline of events is they were correct to try to start the country. They were immediately attacked by every single country that surrounded them, every single one of which was both a dictatorship, one, and two, an ethno-religious dictatorship, right?
Did you say an ethno-dictatorship?
An ethno-religious dictatorship.
I wouldn't put those two together, but yeah, sure. I think it's more of theocracy rather than ethno. Like,
okay, fine. We can call them theocracies. The reason I'm bringing ethno-religion into it is because Judaism is obviously an ethno-religious group, and so I'm trying to make a separation there between the Muslim countries there and the Jewish countries, the country rather. There.
Sure.
But fine, we can say.
I just know that like pan-Arab nationalism was like kind of around, but not. Like all those countries weren't like joining it. Like a lot of the Muslim like shortly after with not part of the subject. So I'm just going to stop because we don't need to go down the rabbit holes.
You're totally fine. Yeah. Okay. So they're immediately attacked by all of these different countries that are all Muslim theocracies, as you wanted to call them. That's, I think, fair. And they're right to defend themselves against these theocracies. Once that happens, there is a very quick response by those theocracies and by the people of those theocracies
to expel Jewish people from their areas.
Which is to expel the Jewish people. Yeah. Yes, exactly right. Yeah. And so over 800,000 Jews from across the Middle East are ethnically cleansed and are forced to go to the one place that will take them, which is Israel. So now you have this massive population of both European and and Middle Eastern. Exactly right. Yep. Jews who are forced into Israel. So those are the first two major populations. And then the third major population is Ethiopia was considering an ethnic cleansing of its Jews. And so Israel saved those Jews as well.
Isn't there race issues with that right now?
Yeah, for sure. There are race issues. And definitely
race issues in Mizrahi as well. Am I pronouncing that right?
But I think that Mizrahi. Yeah.
Mizrahi.
Mizrahi. But like, yes, there are racial infighting between different types of Jews. That's definitely true. But
so do you understand why they're calling it a settler colonialist project?
No. What does that have to do with settler colonialism? No.
For a lot of people, they're linking it, but That's fine.
Wait, so I'm sorry. So there are a bunch of Middle Eastern Jews who are forced out of the rest of the
Middle Eastern Jews that were forced out of the Middle East by theocratic assholes, evil people.
Sure.
Those Jewish people went to Israel, and what happened with those people? Were they fully integrated?
They were. I don't know. I don't know quite what fully integrated means. Like, I would say that there are a lot of parallels between the way that Middle Eastern Jews are treated within Israel and the way that Black people are treated in the United States.
There you go. So you can understand why there's so. That's what I was getting at. So,
but how is that settler colonialism?
Because
racism and settler colonialism are different terms, right? If you ask me whether there are racist in Israel, absolutely. If you ask me whether Bibi was racist, yes, but that's
obviously
different.
So. I think that should be obvious to everybody, but apparently it's not.
Yeah, of course.
Because when there is a settler colonialist project that happened first, like in the 1700s, there was 1600s, I guess, there was a large racial component of it as well. You can't. I'm not saying that this is what I say. I'm saying I'm explaining where their logic is. So a lot of people think that settler colonialism cannot be necessarily separated from the racial component of it, because that is how they've been. That's how they've been not brought up, but that's how the thinking goes.
I think that there are So let's. I'm trying to think of a parallel. There are a lot of problems in terms of the way currently that we treat in the United States Guatemalan immigrants, for example, as a majority white country. Now, we can talk about how we became a majority white country, and obviously that does have a lot to do with settler colonialism, obviously. But in terms of the way that we're now treating the immigrants of Guatemala, I don't quite see how the treatment of the Guatemalans today is settler colonialism, even if it's a result of settler colonialism.
Well, that's why they say it's settler. Right. But to them, they're not separate. That treatment of the Guatemalans today is directly linked to the settler or colonial project, which is directly linked to racism.
Something being linked isn't the same as it being the thing, right?
I mean, sure, but we're talking about the people that we're talking about. We're not talking about you and I. I actually don't want to talk for them. I'm just explaining what their logic is to me, so we can get off this subject.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not the best defender of it.
It seems like a very silly argument to say that everything that is a downstream consequence of settler colonialism is itself settler colonialism. Like, it's the equivalent of saying.
I mean, maybe it's not a direct result of, but when you have an occupation currently ongoing.
Which is the occupation of settler colonialism?
It's occupation, like, it's all connected.
But the point is that, like, I want to be able to understand what specific moment we're talking about, which is the settler colonialism, and what specific moment we're talking about, which is downstream of the settler colonialism.
Right.
And what I've heard is a specific moment in the 1700s, which I'm willing to unpack, but I think you would grant is a silly thing to try to unpack because it's the 1700s, right?
Wait, what? I thought we were going back to talking about Israel, not my examples that I was giving off the cuff.
No, I am talking about
their
Israel.
Logic is.
I'm asking what specific moment was settler colonialism in Israel? In
Israel? To a lot of people, are probably 1910-ish, somewhere around there. When it started.
Okay, and what was the colonialism there? What was happening?
It would be the nascent rise of the two nationalist groups within Israel and within Israel-Palestine /Palestine, the Arab nationalist and the Palestinian nationalist, or the Israeli nationalist. Sorry, the Arab nationalist and the Israeli nationalist trying to establish their own state.
Okay, so both the Palestinians.
Groups.
Or I shouldn't say Palestinians. You're right to say Arabs here.
The Arabs there to the people that we're talking about were, for lack of a better term, native to the area.
Right, but that's not true. There had been a Jewish population that had lived there.
There had been a Jewish population. There had been continuous there for a number of different years, just as there was an Arab population. There had been a number of different years. But the Jewish people that moved from outside of that area were no longer native to that area, and they were to dominate that area.
I'm confused why it is that we're counting people from as far away as somewhere like Poland or Germany. And those Jews, why it is that we're counting places that are very, very distant components of the Middle East and of Muslim society as being somehow connected and therefore not colonial in moving there. But it is colonial when European Jews move there.
Because they hadn't been.
You're talking about 1910. You're talking about an increase in population. Right, there's an increase in population. It is the vast majority of that increase in population is Muslims that are moving there. There's a smaller portion of Jews that are moving there prior to the end of World War II. That smaller portion of Jews that are moving there prior to the end of World War II are majority European, and the majority of these Muslims that are moving there are Middle Eastern, yes, but not of what is modern day Israel-Palestine. There are other places that are just as far apart from that location as is Germany or as is. So I'm curious why.
If the Arabs would have won the war and expelled all the Jews, I guess we'd be talking about the Arabs right now. That's really what it boils down to.
It would have been colonialism had they won. Their action in 1910 would have been colonialism.
Yeah, more than likely. To me, it would be. I don't know what people were talking about. I don't know. I don't know if it's silly.
Like it seems like because
a large part of the problem is how the aftermath of that took place. The aftermath is what creates the occupation and everything like that.
Colonialism is something like we can't name colonialism when it happens. We can only
name it. We can name it. What's the difference between colonies established in Alexandria and colonies established in the United States?
No, Cypher, my point is like if you're defining sort of retroactively what the Jews were doing in 1910 as colonialism, but not what the Muslims were doing also in 1910 as colonialism. You can only do that.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know.
Well, you only do that post hoc.
You kind of have to because colonialism in the United States didn't become like a true thing until all the oppression was established with it and
but
the exploitation. So you can't know that that's going to happen until it does.
If you're no, I don't agree with this. If you're talking about a person like Christopher Columbus or whoever it might be, one of the early people to come here and to subjugate and enslave native people, you can point to that and you can say this is an example of an act of colonialism.
Yes.
And so even if downstream, the French who also did this aren't the ones that won, and instead the British were the ones that won, you can still say that this was an act of colonialism by the French. And so my concern is that we're losing the utility of the term colonialism when we're using it in this post hoc way. So we're only describing
I get your problem. I get the disconnect now. Were the Arabs moving to Palestine intent on subjugating people in Palestine, the other Arabs in Palestine?
Yes, absolutely. The Jews the Jews in Palestine.
The Jews in Palestine.
There were literally
right. So then we can say they were both colonialist projects, but only one succeeded, and therefore we're talking about the one that succeeded.
Wait, but that's not true. Not just one succeeded. Both of them succeeded.
How did they both succeed?
Because if you look at Jordan or if you look at Egypt, those are successful examples of forcing out the Jews and subjugating the Jews of those countries.
Yeah,
and that happened
how long ago?
And that happened in part as a result of the colonial struggle of trying to force out those Jews on behalf of
empire, right?
Leadership. But it wasn't just something that was done by people who were originally of Egypt or originally of Jordan. There were people
the people of Egypt now are not all Egyptians. They're Arabs. They're not native Egyptians, like going far back to fucking ancient times. We know that.
My point is
empires work. Empire is colonialism.
Right. So every empire is colonialism.
I would say every there's some distinctions with like administration, but yes. It's not worth arguing over.
It just strikes me that, like, even if we're going to grant that every single country is colonial, which I'm probably comfortable with at some level, we can make comparative claims, and we can say that some countries are more colonial as projects than others. We can say that obviously the United States is more colonial than something like Israel.
The reason that colonialism came about as a term rather after empire did is because of the way that it was structured. But yes, I agree.
Okay, so if Israel is less colonial than the United States and is also...
I don't know if it is less colonial.
The United States?
I have not heard a good argument to make a decision one way or the other.
I will give my reason that I say that. The reason that I say that is because the vast majority of the first wave, which is to say the European Jews who went to Israel, and the second wave, which is to say the Middle Eastern Jews who went to Israel, were going there because they had no other options, because they were refugees, whether literally or close to it. As a result of that fact, I would argue that theirs was a fundamentally different reason for return. And I will also point out the return, right? Because they are, I understand that you have some concerns over this, but the secular argument for this nationalism and that of that location, like, this is a fundamentally different project than the project of the United States, which is a project of, hey, I've never been there ever in my life, neither of any of my ancestors, but I want to go over there and start enslaving some native people.
I would say if the slavery and stuff never happened in the United States, then there wouldn't be colonial project in the United States. It would be settlements. Even if we hadn't enslaved the native population, if we enslaved, subjugated, all that stuff is what creates a colonial system. It's the same thing as what creates empire, the subjugation of the people under vassalage systems and tributes and all that stuff. If that never happened, then we wouldn't be talking about it because it would have been a different system. Okay, so then slavery. Let's talk about slavery. It's not just slavery, subjugation, slavery, genocide, all of that stuff is what creates and the exploitation of resources over the native populations, blah, 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 blah. The population since founding of Native Americans in the United States has vastly deteriorated because of all those things. Because of all those things, the population of Israeli Muslims, both in Gaza and the West Bank. And I don't think that's a distinction that is necessary for colonialism. Okay, but I'm just taking them piece by piece. The death of people. I want to take these piece by piece. The first contention was this idea of people being genocided, right? Being killed in mass numbers. It did happen in the United States. Yeah, it did happen in the United States. That is can I take them? Can I just go on my screen? Thank you. I appreciate it. So that's the first thing. And it happened in the United States and it didn't happen in Israel-Palestine. The second thing is the slavery. Slavery did not happen at mass scale in the case of Israel-Palestine. It did happen at mass scale in the case of the United States. The third is the fact that the vast majority of American white people who moved to the United States did it just because we wanted to have economic or religious freedoms or whatever, but it wasn't because we either A, had to, with the exception of the Puritans, or B, because we had any sort of ties to that land. In any case, there were no exceptions to that. So it does seem like a fundamentally different project, and I don't feel comfortable sort of making this moral equivalence to them, right? I would say the subjugation is similar enough to make a case that they are equivalent enough. Not saying they're the same, but equivalent enough to have that be a reasonable argument because of the subjugation, because of the occupation, because of the economic deprivation, because of all that stuff. You don't need to have genocide. You don't need to have slavery to have a colonialist system, but you do need oppression and economic deprivation to have it. Generally speaking, you do have all those other things because when colonialism as a concept was created, that's what humans did more often. We have since kind of evolved beyond that with different rules and stuff where it becomes less palatable to just completely wipe out a people and take their land. There's no longer salting the fucking earth after you decimate everybody in that one Athenian fucking thing and back in the with the exception of the 1940s. War.
Yeah, with the exception of the 1940s, across all of Europe.
Since the 1940s. We're talking about modern times.
Yeah, and with the exception
mostly don't do that.
And with the exception of the 1950s of all the Jews across the Middle East, and with the exception of the 1960s and 70s across all of Ethiopia against all the Jews, right?
I said we typically don't. Like we have
right, with the exception of the Jews.
We like that. I wouldn't say with the exception of the Jews because I wouldn't say just the Jews because there's been ethnic cleansing that happened in Iraq that was along religious ethnic lines. There's ethnic cleansing that happened in Sudan, not Somalia. Numerous different places in Africa, Niger, Lagos.
My point is that
Yugoslavia. It's still part of the human condition, but we have rules in place where that has become less of the norm among the powerful, where it was the norm completely among the powerful back in the 1700s
until they it was the norm of the powerful until they successfully did it to the Jews. And you're naming a bunch of other countries that have done it as well, but I wouldn't describe any of those places that you've named as being the powerful. Right.
I wouldn't consider I wouldn't put Israel is not like one of the power brokers in the world. Like I would. Well,
no, anyways. It is a Western country.
Sure.
It is. I think it's fair to call it a powerful country at this point.
That's why I corrected myself. I was like, never mind.
At founding, it wasn't powerful.
Sure.
But I think it's powerful today. Yeah. Yes. But my point is that it seems.
This isn't. I'm trying to make it clear that I'm not having a double standard here.
So. No. I'm not accusing you of that. Yeah. I think that what's frustrating to me is that there's a sense that what happened to make Israel become a country is and to look like what it looks like today is the direct result of the ethnic cleansing across all the Middle East, the ethnic cleansing across all of Europe, and the ethnic cleansing across all of Ethiopia. And that basically, with the exception of the United States, is all of the world's Jews, right? So that is the reason for what it looks like today. And then there's this reasonable concern for the Palestinians who are living in the West Bank and living in Gaza, and particularly in Gaza. But it seems to you can make an issue look different depending on sort of how zoomed in or zoomed out you look at it, right? And I think that a lot of people talk about apartheid, right? And try to make these parallels between apartheid. And you haven't done this, but many people do make this parallel between apartheid and modern Israel. And the response that I've always come to is let's talk about apartheid. Let's talk about apartheid of Eswatini. Let's talk about the apartheid of Lesotho, right? Within the broad, all of South Africa being controlled by white people, there were these two pockets of Lesotho and Eswatini, modern Eswatini at the time, Swaziland, that were, very obviously controlled by Black people. And there are real stories of the struggles of white people living in Eswatini or living in Lesotho, and those aren't made up. But it also seems very silly, in the case of South Africa, to be framing the problem of apartheid and framing the racial struggle therein as though it's a problem of what happened to the white people in Lesotho. Right? We understand that broadly, that is a problem of the history of Black people being screwed over across South Africa as a whole.
Sure, but I don't like this. To me, this kind of starts to remove the moral agency. That's the word I'm looking for. It seems to remove the moral agency from what Israeli Jews in power had done since, and I'm not comfortable doing that because they had the agency to not go through and create the different military occupied zones. They had the ability to allow the full integration of the Arab. The Palestinian population. They had the agency to allow the right of return of Palestinians that were refugees due to the war to go back, but they didn't because they wanted to keep a Jewish majority democracy.
Okay, so in the case of the refugee Palestinian refugee return. One, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right that there are many people who are the descendants of refugees who were forced out of.
Well, let's ignore the descendant part. How many people were expelled? How many people were created as refugees that weren't allowed to return to Israel/Palestine? A couple 100,000. Sure. You're comfortable saying a couple 100,000?
I believe it was a little higher than that. It wasn't quite as high as the number of Jews who were forced out of the rest of the Middle East, but it was quite high. I think it was in the 700,000 range, somewhere around there.
So we can say several 100,000. I'm comfortable saying that without having the direct numbers in front of me right now. So they chose not to do that. And you can say that maybe their choices were understandable, but that's still moral agency.
This is the issue that I'm trying to make more broadly. Like, yes, that's true. But it's also true of every single country across the rest of the Middle East.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there isn't one there, but we're talking about specifically Israel right now. If you want to talk about the evil stuff that happened in the Saudi Arabia, we can talk about that. They're currently engaged in a genocide, or not a genocide because the Houthis are kind of winning, but they're currently engaged in a program to have a Sunni-backed dictatorship be propped up in Yemen. They kill off a lot of Shias in Saudi Arabia to maintain their Wahhabist powers. The founding of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was a program that is similar to everything else that any nation on earth has been created by since colonialism, at the very least.
Yeah, the problem that I'm trying to sort of flesh out here is that even in the case of Jordan and Egypt, and specifically the West Bank of Jordan and Egypt's Gaza, which both used to be parts of those respective countries. Mm-hmm. Jordan forced out all of its Jews. Sure. Egypt forced out all of its Jews. Yep. So, like, when we're talking about, like, this idea of the right of return, you can't simultaneously believe in the right of return in the case of Israel and not in the case of the Gaza Strip, or not in the case of the West Bank. It doesn't make sense.
I didn't say that I don't.
Well, so do you support the idea of Jews?
Right now, that's probably not tenable for the reality of the situation that exists on the ground. Right. So an alternative to that would be some form of reparations that can create economic opportunity for the people that were forced out. And I think that would be completely fair.
Why is that not the same response that you give in the case of Palestinians who want to move back to Israel? Why is it only in one and not the other?
No, I would say that that's probably fair, but I'm saying that at the time, now that would be a fair, maybe a fair thing to do. And I say maybe because I don't know all the particulars, right? What that would entail, how much money that would cost, yada yada yada. Like, it's, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars at the minimum. Okay, sure. But at the time, that wasn't allowed. And that was a choice that Israel made. You can say that the choice made sense given the rest of the world at the time, but that was still an immoral choice for a country that wants to be a liberal democracy.
I don't like the idea of something being an immoral choice because it's the least bad option. Like, I don't
even think that would be the least bad option.
Would you call the occupation of Germany or Japan immoral?
The occupation of Israel, of Germany and Japan.
Post-World War II.
Not at first. I mean, if it continued on for several decades, probably yes.
So the point is that, like, the reason you wouldn't say that isn't because obviously it was still screwing over a lot of innocent Germans. Duh, of course it did, right? And of course that's horrible. But because you understand that the downstream consequences of permitting, the Jews who want to go back to Gaza, who used to be Egyptians, were forced out of Egypt, obviously those Jews and their descendants should not be able to do that because the downstream consequences are immense and would be horrible. And similarly, I'm comfortable saying the same of the idea of a massive number of, at this point, millions of the descendants of people who were forced out of Israel proper, going back to Israel proper.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's something that should happen now. Just so we're clear, I said at the time, not allowing it to happen wasn't an immoral action. Not allowing it to happen now has so many other complications of it that I can't even weigh the moral implications of that right now, because it's just too far beyond my scope of understanding for the logistics and everything like that. So I want to make that clear. At the time, though, it wasn't allowed, and that is especially immoral for a country, for a people that want to say that they are a liberal democracy. Now, this is not double standard. When Saudi Arabia did it, Egypt did it, Jordan did it, when all those, Bahrain, all those other countries did it, they were immoral to do so as well. However, at the same time, they never professed to be a liberal democracy. So their moral implication there is a little less than what it is when a liberal democracy does it, because that's what you expect theocracies to do. You expect that of them. You don't expect it of a liberal democracy. I'm not saying they're still morally equally bad, but there's a difference there still.
Sure. I think that when we're talking about Israel as a liberal democracy, first, like, obviously, it is very different categorically from somewhere like Saudi Arabia that you're naming, or Jordan, of course. But there's a second component, which is that, like, it's not just a liberal democracy. It's a liberal democracy that is explicitly, basically by charter, designed to be a refugee state of return and this protective place for Jews, right? There's a reason for that. And it's very, particularly the time that it was founded, and I'd argue even still to this day, particularly in light of the quite obvious anti-Semitism that we're seeing evidenced even just online, let alone in terms of real life today, across particularly in Europe and the Middle East. Like, that is a defensible mission. And that mission does mean that you're going to have certain things, like, for example, they're going to save the Ethiopian Jews from the ethnic cleansing there, but they're not necessarily going to get involved in what's happening in Sudan, even though those are both horrible situations, because theirs is a mission that is explicitly about Jewish people. Yeah.
That's Zionism, right? So.
Right. But my question is, like, knowing that this was built in the direct aftermath of the Holocaust, like, is it defensible for that to be a mission of...
I think that Israel could still be a refuge for Jewish people without all of the occupation and everything that makes it very much an immoral thing. Like, Israel itself is not immoral, but all the immoral stuff that goes on. Like, it could be a secular liberal democracy that's still a refuge for Jewish people across the world, and not be the occupying force that it is with all of the negative connotations of ethnic nationalism.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. My question was more in terms of this idea of, as you, I'm sure, are aware, there was a large number of Palestinians who were permitted into Jordan about the time that you're talking about. And they overthrew, or they tried to overthrow and tried to kill the king of Jordan, right? Should Israel be morally obligated to risk the overthrow of their democracy, of their country, by these same forces that quite evidently are willing to do that kind of behavior against Jordan, which is not nearly the same kind of racial animus represented as there is against Jews? Again, in the direct aftermath of the Holocaust, in the direct aftermath of what happened across the rest of the Middle East.
But I don't know enough about the attempted overthrow of the Jordanian king to make that calculus. Like, I don't know if it was like a theocratic Muslim Brotherhood-esque thing, or if it was like nationalism and democracy. Like, I don't know what the thing is, so I can't say if it was a democratic revolution kind of thing, then maybe. But like, if it was not, if it was like, but I'm saying I don't know, so I can't make I'd have to research.
Gotcha. This is a natural stopping point. I want to just flag that it's 9:54. I don't know if you wanted to call it here, or if you want to.
Yeah, we can call it here. I mean, if you got any last things to say, like, I think this was cordial. We clearly disagree. Yeah, for sure. We clearly disagree. I don't think you're an evil person for your opinions. They're pretty weighted.
I don't think you're evil either. Yeah, I have I wish that we had gotten into a little bit more about what our solutions are, because I think that we ended up doing more of like a history back and forth, which is fun. But yeah, I wish we were able to get a little bit more into what your solutions are, because I think that a lot of these conversations end up sounding as though, like, I mean, like part of this is just because like the biggest debate that I've done on this subject is against Loanerbox and against Destiny, which I don't know if you've seen that, but like
I briefly saw the Destiny one, but I didn't watch the whole thing because I couldn't find the whole thing.
You're totally fine. Yeah, what I find frustrating about these kinds of conversations sometimes is that it's very easy when people try to put forward any kind of solution to point out that any kind of solution to a situation is horrible, is a bad solution. And I always agree that obviously, yes, every single solution that I can think of is a bad solution. But the frustration is that when we just go around condemning solutions, every single solution, and we don't offer solutions of our own, the impact of that is that it sort of implies the status quo is the best option. And that's why I think it's really important, particularly in the case of the Gaza Strip, even more so than in the case of the West Bank, to start from the baseline of what's going on prior to October 7th was not tenable either for Gazans or for Israelis. And as a starting point, recognizing that however we solve this in terms of what the IDF is going to do once they're able to force Hamas out of power, which is different than destroying them, that starting point of don't just get back to October 6th, I think is a really important one. But anyway, do you have any final thoughts before we bounce?
No, we can have that conversation if you want later. Obviously, yeah, sure. I don't know if there's any actual solution to this that isn't going to be. To be honest, I think the most realistic solution of this is what Bibi is trying to do. I think that's what is likely to happen because I'm just going to say it. I think a lot of people that have the power in order to like intervene and stop that from a moral standpoint aren't going to, because they're a bunch of cowards. And they're very much afraid of Armageddon happening. So, and I think Bibi knows that, which is why he's basically told Biden to go fuck himself in, less ways than saying it directly. But yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.